I never thought a Frisbee would change my entire night, but here we are. There I was, minding my own business on a perfectly ordinary Thursday evening, when out of nowhere, this plastic disc smacks right into some guy's face. Like, full on, how did I even do that kind of smack. And of course, the universe decided he wasn't just anyone. He was the guy who actually caught my eye the moment I saw him at the park. Let me back up a bit. I'm Andrew, 27, and I usually avoid weekend crowds, but work had me tie up loose ends late, so I figured, why not hit the park for a quick Frisbee toss to clear my head? I'm no pro, just some guy who liked the casual rhythm of throwing and catching, mostly just to get outside and forget about emails and deadlines. So it was just me and a couple of folks scattered around the grassy field. The sun was dipping low, golden hour casting this warm glow, and everything felt calm. I tossed the Frisbee out towards the middle of the park, aiming for a guy who looked like he was doing the same kind of end-of-day wind-down as me. He had this easy smile, kind of shy but confident at the same time, like he wasn't bothered by being alone but wouldn't mind some company either. Then I totally botched the throw. The Frisbee curved wildly off course, and before I could even say sorry, it thwacked him square in the forehead. He blinked at me, surprised, then laughed, a little stunned but definitely not mad. I was mortified, half expecting him to roll his eyes and walk off. Instead, he jogged over, still rubbing his forehead, and said, "Okay, that's a new way to meet someone. I'm Luke. I'm usually pretty clueless in these random encounters. I freeze or say something dumb like nice weather, which is the universal escape phrase of awkwardness." But Luke just smiled and asked if I wanted to walk with him. I wasn't sure if he was being polite or just humoring me because I'd just hit him with a Frisbee, but I said yes anyway. The weird thing is, walking with Luke felt natural. Like we'd known each other longer than just a few minutes. And as the sky turned from gold to deep blue, with street lamps flickering on around us, I realized this was turning into the kind of night I never expected. The kind of night that changes everything, starting with a Frisbee and a forehead hit. So yeah, that's how I met the guy that first hit with a Frisbee, and who ended up walking me home. And honestly, I'm still not sure how I got so lucky. But if you want to know what happened next, well, you're gonna have to hear the rest. Walking beside Luke felt weirdly easy. We started off just talking about the park, the weather, and how I apparently needed to work on my Frisbee skills. But then, somehow, the conversation drifted into more personal stuff, like favorite movies, and what we were both doing with our lives. He told me he was a graphic designer, freelancing mostly, and that he moved to the city about a year ago. I told him I worked in marketing and that, yeah, my days were mostly spent staring at spreadsheets and trying to convince people to buy things they didn't really need. Not the most thrilling icebreaker, but Luke didn't seem bored, which was a relief. We kept walking along the sidewalk that skirted the park, the street lamps casting long shadows, and the occasional car humming past. I noticed the way his eyes caught the light, like they were searching for something or someone in the dark. I wanted to ask him what, but somehow I didn't want to break the moment. There was a pause, and then Luke looked over at me and said, "You know, getting hit with a Frisbee isn't exactly how I planned to meet someone tonight, but I'm glad it happened." I laughed, feeling some of the tension ease out of my chest. Yeah, me too. I'm usually way more graceful, or at least less injuring. He shook his head, smiling softly. Graceful isn't always the point. Sometimes it's about the mess-ups that lead somewhere better. That stuck with me. Because, honestly, life had been feeling a little messy lately. I'd been stuck in a rut, wondering if I was just going through the motions without really living. But here was Luke, this unexpected guy who had the patience to laugh at my accidental Frisbee assault and still want to stick around. As we neared the edge of the park, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. So I did something I usually wouldn't. I asked him if he wanted to grab a coffee. I figured it was late, and maybe he'd say no, but to my surprise, he said yes. The coffee shop was a few blocks away. A cozy little place with dim lighting and the smell of roasted beans hanging in the air. We found a corner table and settled in with our drinks, him with a black coffee, me with a chai latte, which I'm pretty sure was my nervous go-to. We talked about music. Turns out we both had a weird obsession with 90s alternative bands, and shared stories about the worst dates we'd ever been on. Luke's stories were hilarious, and I found myself leaning closer, drawn in by the way he got animated when he talked. At one point, he reached across the table to brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. My heart did this stupid little flip, and I had to remind myself to breathe. It was the kind of casual touch that somehow felt electric. When we finally left the coffee shop, the city was quieter, the buzz of late-night traffic replaced by an almost peaceful stillness. Luke offered to walk me home, and I couldn't say no. The night had turned from a simple errand into something I didn't want to end. Walking with him felt easy, like we were the only two people in the world. I found myself opening up about things I hadn't told anyone in a while, how work had been overwhelming, how I sometimes felt invisible despite being surrounded by people. And Luke listened. Really listened. He stopped me just outside my apartment building, looking up at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through the usual bullshit. "You're not invisible, Andrew. You've just been hiding behind all the noise. But I see you." I wanted to say something clever or profound, but all I managed was a quiet thanks. Then, just before he left, Luke leaned in and brushed his lips against my cheek. Nothing flashy, just a simple, gentle kiss that sent a shiver down my spine. "Good night," he said, his voice low. "Good night," I replied, already hoping this was just the beginning. And as I watched him walk away, I realized that getting hit with a Frisbee might have been the worst thing to happen to my evening, or the best. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Not in a "I'm suddenly in love" kind of way, because that would be ridiculous, but more like something inside me had shifted. Like the world was a little less heavy and a little more possible. I kept replaying Luke's smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, and the soft kiss on my cheek. It was wild how something so small could leave such a big mark. I debated whether to text him. I mean, what do you even say after a first meeting that involved a Frisbee to the face, a coffee, and a surprise kiss? But I did it anyway. Sent a simple, "Hey, I had a really great time last night," and to my surprise, he replied almost instantly. Something warm and easy, like we'd picked up a conversation that had been on pause for years. That weekend, we met up again, this time intentionally, no Frisbees involved. We wandered around a street fair with that kind of lazy, contented energy that comes from not needing to impress each other. We shared a giant pretzel, watched a street musician strum his guitar, and just talked. I learned that Luke had a dog named Marley, who apparently had a serious attitude problem whenever strangers tried to pet him. And I told him about my failed attempts at learning guitar, which he pretended to be fascinated by but probably thought was ridiculous. There was a moment, standing next to a makeshift lemonade stand, when Luke's hand brushed against mine. Neither of us pulled away. I couldn't tell if my heart was pounding because of the summer heat or because of him. We walked to the edge of the park again, the place where we first collided, literally and figuratively. I joked about how I owed him a better first impression than a flying Frisbee, and he just grinned at me. "You owe me more than that," he teased, eyes sparkling. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed every little detail, every shared smile, every comfortable silence. It was the kind of connection I thought only happened in movies or cheesy rom-coms, but here it was, real and messy and wonderfully imperfect. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other. Sometimes it was coffee dates, sometimes late-night walks, other times just hanging out at my place watching terrible movies and ordering way too much takeout. With Luke, things felt easy but never boring. He had this way of challenging me just enough to make me think about what I wanted, without pressure or judgment. One evening, we found ourselves on my couch after a particularly long day. The city lights spilled through the window, and Luke was talking about a design project that was stressing him out. I listened, trying to offer advice, but mostly just wanting to be there for him. He paused, looked at me, and said quietly, "Thanks for being here. It means more than you know." I reached out and took his hand. "You don't have to thank me. I want to be." His thumb brushed over the back of my hand, and I felt this warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't just attraction or infatuation. It was something deeper. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of something real. But just as things were falling into place, reality crept in. Luke's work became more demanding, and suddenly the easy rhythm we'd found started to wobble. Messages went unanswered longer, Plans got canceled. I felt that familiar pang of uncertainty creeping back. One night, after a day of silence, I finally texted him, "Hey, are you okay?" His reply was short and vague, something about needing space and figuring things out. I hated the way those words landed, cold and distant like a door slamming shut. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd imagined it all, if Luke had just been a nice distraction. But deep down, I knew it was more than that, and I wasn't ready to let it go. The next time we met, it was awkward at first. We tried to pretend nothing had changed, but the tension was there, thick in the air. Then, Luke looked at me with those honest eyes and said, "I'm scared, Andrew. Scared that I'm going to mess this up." I squeezed his hand, feeling a rush of emotion. Me too, but maybe that's worth risking. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the mess-ups, the frisbee to the face, the awkward pauses, the fear, were all part of something worth holding on to. Because love wasn't about perfection. It was about finding someone who'd walk beside you, even when the path got messy. And Luke, he was that someone. After that night, things didn't magically get perfect, but somehow they felt honest. We stopped pretending and started talking about the stuff that mattered, the stuff we'd both been avoiding. Luke told me how tough it had been moving here, how the freelance world could be isolating, and how he sometimes felt like he was spinning plates, trying not to drop any. I opened up about my own insecurities, the pressure to keep up with a career that sometimes made me feel like I was losing myself. We learned to lean on each other instead of away. It wasn't always graceful. Sometimes we argued about missed plans, or when one of us got a little too caught up in work and forgot to check in. But even the arguments felt like part of the growing pains that come with something real. One weekend, Luke invited me to a small gathering at his place. It wasn't a big deal, just a few friends, but I was nervous. Meeting someone's friends always feels like an audition. What if they didn't like me? What if Luke suddenly realized I wasn't who he thought I was? Turns out, I didn't need to worry. Luke's friends were warm and easygoing, with that kind of effortless cool that made me feel like I somehow belonged in their circle. There was laughter, music, and the smell of pizza in the air. At one point, Luke pulled me aside onto his tiny balcony. The city skyline was alive with lights, and the night air was cool and crisp. He looked at me with this softness I hadn't seen before and said, "I'm really glad you're here." I smiled, the kind of smile that reaches your eyes and makes your chest feel full. Me too. He took my hand, fingers curling around mine, and I felt a pulse of something electric. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he admitted. "About how strange it all is, how we started with a frisbee to the face and somehow ended up here." I laughed, shaking my head. "Yeah, who knew a frisbee could be the start of something?" He grinned, then got serious. "I don't want to mess this up, but I also don't want to run away from it." I squeezed his hand tighter. Neither do I. That night, when I got home, I found myself replaying everything. The conversations, the touches, the moments when the world seemed to pause just for us. It wasn't just about the butterflies or the sparks. It was about feeling seen, understood, and wanted. A few days later, we decided to take a trip to the nearby coast. We packed light, grabbed some snacks, and hit the road with the windows down and music blasting. The drive was filled with goofy sing-alongs, shared playlists, and easy silence. At the beach, we walked along the shoreline, the waves cold against our feet. Luke pulled me close, and I rested my head against his shoulder. We talked about dreams, some serious, some silly, and for the first time, I felt like the future wasn't something to dread, but something to look forward to. But even as things were unfolding in the best way, I couldn't shake the glimmers of doubt that sometimes flickered in the back of my mind. Would the distance between us ever feel too wide? Was I ready for what this could become? One evening, as we sat on his couch watching the sunset, Luke looked at me and said, "I know this isn't going to be easy, but I want to try. With you." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "Me too, Luke. I really do." We leaned into each other, the kind of kiss that spoke of promises and beginnings, of hope tangled with uncertainty. And in that moment, with the city humming softly around us, I realized that sometimes love doesn't come in a perfect package. Sometimes it's messy, awkward, and unexpected, but it's real. And it's worth it. So yeah, I hit a guy with a Frisbee that night, and it turned out to be the best mistake I ever made. Because Luke, he's not just the guy who caught my Frisbee. He's the guy the first one to catch me whenever the world feels like it's spinning too fast. And honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes. After that weekend at the coast, things settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable, but still exciting. Luke and I started carving out more time for each other amidst our busy, chaotic lives. It wasn't always easy. His freelance gigs would sometimes pull him away for long hours, and my marketing job demanded late nights. But we made it work. We became experts at stealing moments, a quick coffee break, a late-night phone call, or a shared playlist when we were apart. One night, about a month after that trip, I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through emails and half listening to a podcast, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Luke. "Any chance you're free tonight? I've got something to show you." Now, Luke was usually pretty casual with plans, but this message had a vibe. Like he was excited or maybe a little nervous. I quickly typed back, "Yeah, I'm free. What's up?" "Come over. Don't ask questions. Just bring yourself." I laughed to myself and grabbed my jacket. Something about that mysterious text made my heart race. Not in a bad way, but in the way you feel when you're about to step into something new, something that might change everything. When I got to his apartment, I found him waiting by the door with that easy smile he wore when he was genuinely happy to see me. He grabbed my hand, leading me inside. "Close your eyes," he said. I did as told, and he guided me into the living room. When I opened my eyes, there it was, a small canvas propped up on the coffee table. It was a painting, simple but vibrant, with swirls of blues and purples that reminded me of the night sky. "I've been working on this," Luke said, cheeks flushed. "It's supposed to be us, I guess. The chaos, the calm, the unexpected turns." I felt my throat tighten. It was beautiful, and knowing he'd created it for me made it even more special. "It's incredible, Luke. Thank you." He shrugged, looking a little embarrassed but proud. "I guess I'm not just a freelance designer. I'm also an amateur artist now." We laughed. And then, without thinking much about it, I reached out and kissed him. It was soft and slow, the kind of kiss that feels like a promise being made without words. As the weeks rolled on, we kept building on that foundation. We met each other's friends, shared little traditions, like making pancakes on Sunday mornings, or binge-watching cheesy sci-fi shows, and talked about everything from family to fears. One night, we were lying on the couch, limbs tangled and the city skyline glowing outside the window, when Luke turned to me and said, "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, curious. "Do you think us, could be forever?" I stared at him, feeling the weight of the question. It wasn't something I dared to say out loud yet, but deep down, I wanted the same thing. "I think," I said slowly, "that it already feels like forever. Like something we're supposed to figure out together." He smiled, relief and hope dancing in his eyes. "Good, because I don't want to let go." But life, as it tends to do, threw us a curveball. Luke got an offer for a design contract overseas. A big opportunity. The kind that could launch his career in ways he'd dreamed of. But it meant leaving the city, leaving me. We spent hours talking about it, weighing the pros and cons, trying to figure out what the right move was. I wanted to be supportive, but the thought of him so far away was like a knot tightening in my chest. In the end, we decided we'd give long distance a try. It felt scary and uncertain, but also hopeful. Because if what we had was real, it could survive a few time zones. The night before he left, we took a walk through the park where it all began. The same park where I'd hit him with a Frisbee, where we'd first talked and laughed and started something neither of us expected. We sat on a bench, fingers intertwined, watching the stars peek out over the city. "I'm going to miss this," Luke said quietly. "Me too," I admitted. He leaned his head on my shoulder, and we stayed like that for a while, just holding on. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. Promise me we'll keep trying, that no matter how hard it gets, we won't give up on us." I looked at him, the guy who had crashed into my life in the most unexpected way, and I nodded. "I promise." As he boarded his plane the next day, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. The future was uncertain, but the thing that started with a Frisbee to the face had grown into something real, something worth fighting for. And honestly, I was ready for whatever came next. The first few days after Luke left felt like a weird kind of limbo. I kept expecting to hear his laugh from the next room or feel his hand brush mine when I got up too close, but the apartment was quiet, too quiet. I found myself pacing the rooms, half expecting the door to swing open and him to be standing there with that lopsided grin of his. We texted a lot, of course, long messages, voice notes, even the occasional video call when time zones aligned, but nothing could really fill the space he left behind. I won't lie, it was tough. Some nights, I'd lie awake staring at my phone, wondering if the distance was going to swallow us whole. One night, about a week in, I got a text from Luke that just said, "Can we talk?" That classic "we need to talk" vibe had me bracing for bad news, but it turned out he was struggling more than he'd let on. He said the time difference was messing with his work, he missed me badly, and the loneliness was hitting harder than he expected. We ended up on a video call that stretched into the early hours. We talked about the little things. What we ate for dinner, the ridiculous shows we were watching, the way the city looked at night through my window. But beneath all that, there was a current of something heavier, a shared feeling of missing each other that words couldn't quite capture. Despite the distance, those conversations kept us tethered. I started sending him photos of my day, little snapshots of my life, a cup of coffee, a street musician, the park bench where we'd sat the night before he left. And he sent back sketches and designs, some of which he said were inspired by me. One Friday, he surprised me with a package. Inside was a painting, similar in style to the one he'd made months ago, but this time it was brighter, more vibrant, like the colors had come alive. On the back, he'd written, "For when the miles feel too long." I pretty much stared at that painting for a good 10 minutes before calling him, voice thick with emotion. "You're incredible," I told him. "Thank you." We agreed to set a date for me to visit him in a few months. Having that goal gave me something to hold on to, a light at the end of the tunnel. We talked about exploring the city where he was, about wandering through museums and trying every taco truck we could find. But even with all the planning and excitement, the distance gnawed at us. There were days when messages went unanswered for hours, and I'd spiral into that familiar spiral of doubt and insecurity. Was he losing interest? Was I? One night, after a particularly long silence on his end, I sent a simple message. "Are you okay?" His reply came hours later, apologetic but honest. He was overwhelmed, tired, and scared that being apart was changing things between us. Instead of panicking, I wrote back something I hoped would help. "We're in this together, remember? It's okay to be scared. I am too." That seemed to bring us back from the edge. We started carving out regular times for calls, setting up little rituals, like watching the same movie simultaneously or having breakfast together over video chat. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One unexpected upside was how much we got to know each other through words and screens. We shared dreams and secrets that maybe we wouldn't have if we'd been side by side all the time. It felt like building a connection that was about more than just physical presence. Months passed, and the day of my visit finally arrived. I was a bundle of nerves and excitement as I boarded the plane. The moment I stepped off and saw Luke waiting for me, a goofy smile plastered across his face. All the distance and doubt melted away. We spent that week wandering his city like teenagers on a first date, getting hopelessly lost in alleys filled with street art, trying foods we couldn't pronounce, and stealing kisses in quiet parks. In every moment, I felt like I was coming home. On the last night of the trip, Luke took me back to the beach where we'd walked during our first weekend together. The ocean was calm, and the stars stretched endlessly overhead. He pulled me close and said, "I don't want to do this long-distance thing again if we don't have to." I looked up at him, heart pounding. "What are you saying?" He took a deep breath. "I want to move back, to the city, to be with you, for real." I felt tears prick my eyes. It was more than I could have hoped for. "You have no idea how much I want that, too." We kissed under that vast sky, the future suddenly feeling less scary and more full of promise. A few weeks later, Luke made the move. It wasn't without its challenges, packing up his life, finding a new place, the awkwardness of starting over, but he was here, with me. And as I sit here now, watching him laugh over some dumb joke, I realize how strange and wonderful life can be. A frisbee to the forehead, a walk in the park, a promise made under the stars. Sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected ways, and it's messy and imperfect and completely worth it. So yeah, I hit a guy with a frisbee once. And now, he's the guy the first can't imagine living without. It's funny how the smallest moments can change everything. Who would have thought that a frisbee, accidental, clumsy, totally me, would kick off something so real? Looking back, I realize it wasn't the frisbee itself, but everything that came after. The laughter, the awkwardness, the conversations that stretched late into the night, and the slow, steady building of trust between two people who didn't expect to find each other. Having Luke here, in the same city, in the same apartment, is a feeling I don't take for granted. We still have our ups and downs. Sometimes work stress spills over, or one of us gets caught up in old habits, but we face it together now. No more long-distance uncertainty, no more wondering if the miles will swallow us whole. Just us, figuring it out day by day. One evening recently, we found ourselves back at that park where it all began. The light was soft, just like the night of the Frisbee incident, and the air carried the faint scent of grass and summer. We sat on the same bench, hands intertwined, watching people stroll by. Luke squeezed my hand gently and smiled that same easy smile I felt for months ago. "Remember how this all started?" he asked. I laughed. How could I forget? "I'm still surprised you didn't run away screaming," he chuckled. Me too. We sat quietly for a moment, just taking it in. The way the city hummed around us, the warmth of being close, the comfort of having found someone who sees you, really sees you. "I'm glad you hit me with that frisbee," Luke said softly. "Me too," I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. There's no grand, cinematic declaration or perfect moment. Just this, the quiet assurance that we're here, together, imperfect and real. And honestly, that feels a lot like love. Sometimes the best beginnings are the ones you don't see coming. And sometimes the best stories start with a frisbee to the forehead.